One from me, Brent Graham of Good for the Game. And yes, it's Thursday night, not 9 o'clock, but 8 o'clock. We're going out 1 hour early, mainly as a result of load shedding, but also gave me a good opportunity to get an offshore guest in the studio once again. We're going to be talking URC, of course, Six Nations taking a break this weekend. And let's welcome Nathan Mossman, the Mossman. Nathan, good to have you back on the show. I can tell you rave reviews from your first appearance on the Handicap, and really good to have you on.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, good to be back. You can blame me for the change in time. Yeah, it's actually earlier here in New Zealand, which you think would be more disruptive, but it's actually better for me. Obviously, got a bunch of childcare related things to do in the mornings, so yeah, starting an hour earlier actually is my benefit. So apologies to anyone.
No, 100%. And yeah, I can tell you with the load shedding switching around as well, I quite like the idea of getting it out of the way quite early as well. And something, the starting time of the show is something I've always toyed with. I've always thought, 9 o'clock suits some people. And then another way to look at it is like 9 o'clock on a Tuesday or Wednesday night at the moment, it's Champions League football. So a lot of South Africans follow that. So, I've tried it on a Friday afternoon. Also, you often find the later the better in terms of team news and stuff like that. But sometimes, yeah, it's just with a show like this, it's also no real value getting it out like half an hour before the game, because then by the time the guys who missed the live show watch, well, there's nothing to see there. That's but right. First up, let me chat to you a little bit about the Six Nations. You've been enjoying the tournament. I know it's not one that you necessarily are betting in as much because, like we discussed last time, the bookies are pretty much on top of everything.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny time of year. So it's I watch the games and I do enjoy them, but on the flip side is that I'm sort of not enjoying it so much from the betting side, just because it just means there's fewer games. So yeah, definitely watching it. Definitely, extremely interested. Probably interested as much as anything else in terms of just watching individual players, like trying to establish like who the real key players are for these teams, and then how that will then translate back to the club teams. But yeah, as I said, it's kind of a weirdly quiet time of the year leading up to sort of the eye of the storm in a way, because when you're betting across all the leagues, like 5-6 leagues like I am, there's going to be a weekend, coming up in the next sort of month or so where I think there's 32 or 34 games, all of which, are bettable. So it's crazy, because when you think about, NPC, for example, it's a 77 game season, I think. So it's half a season of NPC in one weekend.
Wow, that's an incredible way to think of it. But yes, there's so much rugby, and I found it's one of the things. I mean, I always used to try and bet on every game, and like you say, they're all bettable. And I guess when there's that many games, that you have to sort of narrow it down and refine it to maybe your top 10 or 12 for the weekend.
Yeah, you do, but at the same time, it kind of mentally it sort of frees you up from sweating any particular game. If you think you've got a decent edge, you back everything that you can, and then you're sort of hoping 60% of them come in. And on a big sample size, that's generally what happens.
No, fair enough. A good strategy there. Just before we get into URC, I've just brought up the Super Rugby outright. So I know we haven't got a lot of the other markets that are going to come out probably in the next week. But just anything stand out to you there on the outrights? Any team? Crusaders 21-10, their first season without Razor. Chiefs, who I was very impressed with last season, 26-10. Anything stand out there as a bit of early value for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a school of thought, and I've heard it elsewhere, and I think it's probably true that in general, if you're going to win Super Rugby, you need a quality international number 10. And if you think about the teams that actually have one of those, they're pretty few and far between, especially with some of the players that had left. So I think the Chiefs obviously qualify with Mackenzie. Blues, I think Stephen Perifetta has got the ability and potential to break through now that Beauden Barrett's not there. The other teams, not so much. You're going to see probably Brett Cameron for the Hurricanes. You're going to see with Fergus Burke out probably some combination of Rivers, Rehana, and Teha Kamara playing for the Crusaders. Not exactly household names, right? So I would almost look at sort of perhaps a sneaky, Chiefs Blues to make the final.
Well, you mentioned not household names, and that takes me to the next question I was going to ask you about your competition that you run, the draft. Now, I'm going to be joining your league, and I'll probably look for one other fellow good for the game presenter or fan to come along with me there. But I was very interested to have a look at your video. I see you first of all, you've been going quite a few years.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you could just quickly explain a little bit more about the concept. But what interested me was the actual draft initially. Is everyone together, whether it be online or in a room, doing the draft, which I thought was very, very interesting, a great concept.
Yeah, it's probably the most unique thing about fantasy rugby draft. Based on American style fantasy sports, drafting over there is huge. NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, that the concept is that you are playing in a league with 8 or 10 teams. Everybody picks a team, and every player can only be in one team. So the online draft is obviously done through the website. Come together. It runs over however how quickly people can actually pick players. So it might be that it's over in half an hour, might be an hour. It just depends how fast people can get through it. And everybody has a turn at picking a player. As I said, that player is just only on one team. And then at the end of it, you take that squad, and every week you're playing head to head against another person in that league, and the fantasy points get added up, and every week you're either taking a win or a loss basically, and then that goes into the table, and then eventually leads to making the final. So so every week kind of counts, and it can be pretty dramatic as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. And just give us how do the guys find that? I will bring it up next week. We'll do a show on it, and also probably a Super Rugby show. How do the guys find the fantasy site?
Yeah, I think probably the easiest way is just if you just Google fantasy rugby draft. That's actually the URL as well, fantasyrugbydraft.com.
Excellent. Well, let's move on to the URC now. We've got 8 games to look forward to this weekend, 2 of them taking place on Friday night. And I can tell you quite a bit of betting movement already in some of these games. Here we've got the Scarlets. There was plus 7.5 Scarlets early in the week. The money has come for Munster. It's up now to plus 12.5 the Scarlets. And a points line here, Mossman, of 44.5 total points.
Yeah, I think this is probably right where it should be. So it's probably, again, in terms of a place to start, one that I'd leave alone. And it's going to be a bit of a common theme, I guess, across a few games. There's clearly disruption to certain squads, the Six Nations squads, and it'll test the depth of some of them. There is also a lot of news sort of bouncing around about players that have been released from those squads and are then available back for the club teams. So you go through a point where you're trying to sort of piece together a potential starting lineup from who's available, who's been released, who's not injured. And it does become a bit tricky. Obviously, with this one, we know what the teams are. And as I said, I think it's probably right where it should be. So not one that I'd be betting.
Right, I think the early punters who got into the minus 7.5 or 8.5 Munster got the good deals there. Personally, the handicap getting a bit high. Look, I've seen Munster. I underestimated Munster with their so-called second team before against a first team squad. Now you're playing against a Scarlet squad that's also obviously missing a couple. I have to say, if pushed, I'd be leaning towards Munster, but I'm going to be probably looking at the total points line in this game. 44.5 looks fairly low, so might be tempted for a bit of an overplay there. Let's go on to the second game on Friday night. I think the kickoffs are pretty much the same time. Very slight movement to this handicap. We had Zebre open plus 12.5. They've edged into plus 11.5 against Edinburgh, and we've got a total points line here of 51.5. And you were telling me off air, Nathan, you got a fancy in this game.
I do, yeah. I like Edinburgh here. I think this line is probably a few points short. Edinburgh, I think they're an underrated team, probably across the entire season. But I think they're also benefiting from that. They've had a couple of players released in their halfback pairing. So always like to see like a full strength 9-10 partnership. I think that's really important. The Italian teams, I think Zebre in particular, you're going to have your depth tested when you're probably not the strongest squad to begin with, and then you lose some of these Italian internationals. So I as I said, I do like Edinburgh here. I think the team that they're putting out is pretty decent, and yeah, I taken them already at 10.5. where I could find it this morning. I'm not sure you'll see 10.5 again, but even at 11.5, I'll probably go back to the well with Edinburgh.
Put and pick on Edinburgh there. That's Friday night's action. Let's move into Saturday, the first of the South African derbies, 2 of them taking place this weekend. The Lions and the Bulls, these sides, of course, played in Pretoria a couple of weeks ago. The Lions coming back to very nearly beat the Bulls in that one, missing a kick in the last minute that would have got the win. Well, they're at home now. That's the Emirates Stadium, I can tell you, in the background behind us, and the beautiful Johannesburg CBD surrounding it. We've got the Lions plus a 5.5 here and a total points line of 54.5.
Yeah, I think the Lions are a team that you'll keep backing until there's a reason not to. They've massively, overperformed. I think they're still underrated. They're one of these teams that is benefiting from the fact that they actually don't have a bunch of star players. So in general, they're rolling out the same lineup. It's very consistent. They're not having to rest international players, and they've just really stepped up. And I think they're the kind of thing that the casual bettor probably looks at them and says, this is a bunch of relative no names, but every week if they're losing by close margins, and they're pushing the big teams all the way. So I think I'm seeing 4.5, but if I could get 5.5, I definitely fancy the Lions, especially at home. I think they were beaten by the Bulls by 2 points away in the last game.
Like a 30-28 or something like that.
Yeah, my understanding was that they were potentially a bit unlucky in that game as well. So yeah, I think the Lions are a play-on team.
Right, yeah, I'm looking personally at the points line here, 54.5. I actually expected this to open a little bit higher. I thought maybe 57.5. So I am looking, when these teams play, there can be tight phases of the game, but usually at some point it explodes. As far as Johannesburg weather is concerned, I can tell you quite a few thunder showers around this week, but the Ellis Park drainage is generally pretty good, and I'm expecting that we'll get some decent conditions on Saturday. And yeah, looking at points, either over 54.5, alternatively, I'll have a look at the team points. Bulls probably around 29.5, and Lions, I imagine, around 24.5. We'll have a look at those. Thanks to the guys who are involved in the live chat. I know a lot of our regulars are probably going to tune in at 9 o'clock and get a bit of a shock. But anyway, they'll be able to watch the recording of the show then. And next week, we'll definitely be back at 9 o'clock for the show. Right, let's move on to the next game in the URC. Interesting one, this. We've got Leinster, minus 22.5 against Benetton. This handicap opened at 25.5, and there was immediately a bit of money for Benetton, saying that obviously the Leinster second stringers might battle to put them away. Of course, though, Benetton make up a lot of the Italian side, so it's really going to be two teams testing their depth here.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Benetton actually have some sneaky depth just for the fact that there's a few non-Italian sort of international players in there. So yeah, I'm thinking of guys like Jacob Umaga and Malachi Fekitoa. And I think obviously this is going to be a case of wait and see with the teams, but it could be that it's not necessarily just the Leinster B team, whether they actually roll out some of the, the C team, get the under 14s in there, that sort of thing. But
the team they sent to South Africa last year. That was a very young team.
Yeah. So I would still lean Benetton, even at the 22.5. I think again it's one of these ones where casual bettors look at a game like this and just assume that it's going to be a hiding. But that's a lot of points to make up. And so we'll wait and see with the teams, but definitely got to lean towards Benetton here.
Yeah, that seems to where the market sentiment is leaning at the moment. Let's go on to the second South African derby. Interesting one. We've got the Sharks at home plus 3.5 points against the Stormers, and a points line here 46.5. Of course, Durban this time of the year tends to be hell of a humid, so you always got to be a little bit careful about that points line. But I know you're more of a handicap punter there, Nathan. What do you make of this one?
This is a difficult one because my numbers are telling me to hit the Sharks, but I'm not sure I can bring myself to do it. It's just been so woeful. There's clearly something that's not quite right. There's no lack of talent in the Sharks team, but in terms of pulling it all together, they just haven't been able to do that at all this year. So, there's probably a performance in there maybe waiting to break out, but you'd almost want to be on that bandwagon too late rather than too early. So although, as I said, numbers say Sharks, I think I would stay clear because I'm just not sure. And the other thing in terms of some of the potential selections is there's been some really mixed messages from both coaching staffs. I mean, all I've really said is that some Springboks will be rested and some will be playing. It's like, okay, well, that's helpful. No sort of clear direction, but let's wait and see. If there's, it seems heavily favoured sort of one way or the other. I could change my mind, but right now I'm probably staying clear.
Yeah, that's a game I'm also battling with a little bit. I mean, what you're saying about the Sharks is just, there's so many guys who watch the show, who've been on the show, who will just be nodding their head in agreement with you there because they look so good on paper. And so many of us have been burnt. And just one question I want to ask you then, because I heard you say where your numbers are pointing you and that you might battle to go ahead. Do you sort of follow generally a numbers-driven strategy? And do you let your emotions, for example, in this case, where something's just telling you, just be careful, it's the Sharks. How much of that do you let get involved, or do you generally say, this is where the numbers are pointing me, I'm going in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say it's probably 80% numbers. And what I'm looking for is with the remaining 20% in terms of that kind of, qualitative rather than quantitative sort of handicapping is if something looked straight away like clearly wrong, there are times when you're just like, no, that can't be right. And in general, my instincts about those things are pretty good. You'll say, okay, if that's wrong, I'm going to stay clear of it. And I'd say, well over half the time you're correct about that. In terms of emotion, it's probably more just building up a little bit of a mental bank of teams that can't be trusted and the ones that can, and the ones that tend to always cover, despite whatever the circumstances are. And I think that's the kind of stuff that I think starts to pay off and kind of, when you've got that sort of narrative-based stuff that feeds into it and kind of augments the numbers, I think.
Xavier saying Sharks just not worth the money at the moment, maybe next season. And that's pretty much following that advice. Yeah. And just interesting you say that because I always laugh. I have a good mate of mine, Brendon OConnell. He's over in the UK now, but him and I started betting together years ago when it first became legal in South Africa. And if you listen to him talk, you actually sometimes can say, that guy's been burnt by a lot of teams over time. So the point I want to make here is, and I tend to be like him, the more you punt, the longer your list of teams you don't trust gets. So right. When you're sort of more in the earlier stages, and what happens eventually, you actually start getting, and I've seen it happen with guys where they got burned so much and then almost lose their nerve, if I want to put it that way. And I'm not suggesting that's the case with Brendon.
Yeah,
but
no, you're right.
I've been pretty close to that point myself. And at the end of the day, you've got to, Rugger Bugger used to come on the show. He's actually in Australia now, Sean Nicholas. And he had a saying, scared money don't make money. And it's so true. When I've been flying high and I'm betting confidently, things are going well. And suddenly, when things not going so well, I don't trust myself, and all of a sudden I don't want to put the proper stake down, and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I suppose we could have another whole conversation just about betting strategies. But
yeah, definitely, yeah. I mean, the truth is, if you back the Sharks this weekend and lost that bet, you'd hate yourself because you'd think, what was I thinking? Exactly. But you're right. The flip side is that it's often the tough bets are the ones that you do want to be making because they're probably the ones that the general public, the casual bettor, are never going to make, and there's probably value in just that.
No, for sure. And just a reminder, if you do enjoy the show, give us a like and hit the subscribe button as well. Right, we're rolling forward through the games. We're on to the next one. There's been a bit of betting movement here. I saw Cardiff plus 4.5 early in the week, into plus 2.5 now against Connacht, and a low points line here of 42.5. Did you get any of that 4.5? Is it your money driving this move, or is it just a speculation around team news there, Nathan?
It's not me on this one, but it's an interesting one because I think there's still better numbers than that kicking around on Cardiff. I can see 3.5, that sort of thing. And I do lean Cardiff here. I think they have there's some real potential here for them to win this game outright. Obviously, with a small cap, that's not unusual. But in general, I think backing home underdogs is something that I'm inclined to do, like to do. Obviously, the team news is going to be a big deal here. Some of the things that would keep me off this is Connacht are not a team that have lost a lot of players to the Irish setup. Just having a quick look through the squad, at the start of the Six Nations, I think they only had 2 players, in the Irish squad. Obviously, they one of them is Bundy Aki, who's a big player for them. They've lost Matt Hansen, who again was some of these teams they're pretty low on star power, and a couple of names like that, they're quite heavily reliant on for a little bit of magic. So, but again, my numbers favour Cardiff. I want to see the kind of team that they can put out, because they're in the opposite camp where they've, I'd say maybe half of the Irish Welsh squad is made up of Cardiff players, or at least it looks like that. So yeah, leaning Cardiff, going to see what happens. But yeah, as I said, I think there's a decent chance of them winning on the money line.
Right, just a reminder that we'll be chatting with Nathan next week about a bit of Super Rugby as well. So look, keep an eye on the Good for the Game forum and on our Twitter accounts for that time. More than likely do a live show there as well. Right, let's move on. We got Glasgow up against the Dragons. And this line, I think, has shifted towards Glasgow. I think there was 13 or 14 and a half when I looked. These lines, by the way, I took off a site called PokerBet, a South African bookmaker. And it was about an hour before the show when I took them. So also possibility of movement. And we got minus 15 and a half, the Glasgow Warriors, and points line of 50.5. Yeah, so
I'm seeing sort of 16 out there now. I'm still prepared to take that. That's we talked earlier about teams that you stay clear of. Glasgow are in the opposite camp, so Glasgow are a team that I've sort of backed all year, and they've performed or overperformed expectations, and I like them again here. I think from some of the reading I've done, like they've had, I think, 5 players released out of the Scotland squad to play in this game, including a couple of front row players, which again like to see some sort of consistency and experience in the front row as well. So I think that's important. So yeah, I mean, long story short, I know there's been some movement, but it was actually it's kind of similar to I think the first time I was on the show, and Glasgow was my best bet then, and I thought that the cap was well short of where I thought it would finish, and I think this is probably the same.
Okay, so confident pick on Glasgow there. Let's go on to the final game of the weekend. It's the Ospreys plus 4.5 against Ulster. We've got a low points line here of 42.5, suggesting the weather's probably not going to be that great. What do you make of the handicap?
Yeah, this is one where I'm leaning Ospreys. I suppose that's the place to start. Ulster have had some players released out of the Irish squad, so they've had a bit of a boost, and I think that's possibly made the line move a bit as well. The Ospreys, though, they've got some players back, international kind of caliber players, Alex Cuthbert, Justin Tipperick, these kind of guys who actually weren't in the Wales squad because they were already injured. So in a way, they're being boosted, but it's kind of a little bit under the radar. And Ospreys as a team, not as affected by the Wales call-ups as some of the other teams. And I think in general, Ospreys have been underrated. I think there's a little bit of stigma attached to all of these Welsh teams that they're kind of all tarred with the same brush as being rubbish. But Ospreys, I think in general, outperformed expectations, and you might be able to get a better number than 4.5 if that sort of that public perception of Ulster good, Ospreys bad kind of comes through. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for, and I think I'd take Ospreys at maybe a slightly better number.
So just going back to betting strategy for a second, when you run your numbers and you see something pointing towards a bet, you sort of assess at that stage. Maybe sometimes you fire in because the market's going to move in your direction, but the other times where you go, let me just hold fire here, the market might actually move against my feelings, which actually means I'll be getting a better price.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of that I think is just about perception. If there's the public like to bet certain teams, so I don't think there's any big secret behind that. If you've ever read, there was a book called Freakonomics, and they were talking. There's a section in there on the betting market, and they talk about how you pay a tax on public teams, Dallas Cowboys, these kind of teams. I think there's still probably value in betting underdogs. Most people, they don't really want to do it. People get that feeling they want to be on the winning side. So a lot of the times, when you're talking about weighting, it is just seeing if the favorite will take money and maybe move a little bit.
Yeah, I can remember quite a few international games, like with South Africa against England, for example. Over the years, the money has come for the English. And quite often it's just the sheer power of, I want to call it, the British pound compared to the rand, where there's just such weight of money that the market does tend to move towards that team. And as you say, lots of loyal punters there. I think that brings us to the end of our URC games, which then takes us to the end of the show. And we'll just run through the best bets. You'll be done in good time to do the school lifts. And take us to your best bets there, Nathan.
Yeah, so I'm actually, at this point, I'll go for the Scotland double. So I'll take Edinburgh. Obviously, already have bet that one because the team news is out. And then based on what I'm seeing, I'll be doing the same with Glasgow.
Excellent. And I'll be sending out my newsletter tomorrow sometime. I had a good little run of it, but unfortunately hit a bit of a bad one last week going down, and also just missing the accumulator where I not very wisely went against the panel last week. So you can subscribe to that newsletter down in the subscription box below. I saw another comment coming in. It was Bitsy, who I think, Bitsy, remind me, you in New Zealand, I think. Best bet, UFC parlay, Danny Barlow, over 1.5 rounds, over Elliot at Woodburn. I'm actually going to be having a look at the UFC a little bit later. So, yeah, I know it's quite a big weekend of UFC coming up, UFC 298. So looking forward to that as well. And certainly from my perspective, I'll be mainly focusing on the rugby this weekend. But Nathan, good to chat to you. We'll be in touch over the weekend just to firm up some plans for next week, both for doing the draft, but also having you on us. I think what we're going to do, you mentioned 32 games. Sometimes to try and do 32 games on a Thursday night is just, it's just crazy. What I'm probably going to look to do is split the show a bit. So what I'll probably do is move the Super Rugby out of this particular show, and we can do it at a time maybe in the morning when it's your evening, whatever. But we can have a look and do that, so the guys can keep an eye out for that. But he's also in Australia as well. So yeah, excellent. Looking forward to that. And good punting to you this weekend.
Yeah, I was going to say, and the good thing about Super Rugby this year, just in terms of that timing, is that all of the team news is being announced at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, New Zealand time, which is 4 p.m. in Australia, depending on where you are. So, the good thing about that is that pretty much no matter when you have the show, you're going to have the team news, and there's always a massive advantage in that because if you've got perfect information, you're in a much better position to know what bets you should be making.
That's great news because that's always the issue, and particularly now with these, URC games, the teams do come out so late, and quite often the Gallagher Premiership. When I used to do the Gallagher Premiership, eventually it just got the team news was just so important it was really hard to talk about without the team. So that's excellent news on Super Rugby. So it gives us quite a lot of flexibility to get the show done probably on the Thursday or something with team news there. Excellent. Well, we didn't have all of our regulars in tonight. Hopefully they'll catch the replay and join us next week, 9 o'clock, where we, of course, are going to have Six Nations action as well. Thanks to the guys who did come in on the live chat. And Nathan, thanks to you, man. Enjoy the rest of your Friday, and good punting to you this weekend.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week, 9 o'clock, for the Handicap Rugby.